Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm John and this is Hannah.
Hi.
And all this month we're going to be looking at the various prompts for RPGaDay 2025. So let's get into it.
Day 25, and the prompt is challenge. What's a challenge, John?
So, to me, I'm probably thinking a little bit literally here, but as soon as I heard challenge, the thing it made me think of is in D&D, they have challenge ratings for monsters. And the idea is, obviously, as most of us know, is that you can use those challenge ratings to make sure that you have a balanced encounter for your party. So it's not like massively easy or it's not a complete whitewash, unless that's what the GM wants. It gives you a yardstick by which to measure how difficult this combat's going to be for my group of 4 level 5 player characters or whatever. Now, the only problem with that is I have genuinely never heard anyone say, oh, I tell you what, that challenge building stuff in insert favourite edition of D&D here, oh, it's really great, It's dead easy to use. I can build an encounter. It does what I want it to. It's absolutely great. Couldn't be without it. Instead, what I most hear when people talk about it is like, oh, yeah, you have to take this into account, or like, oh, it doesn't really deal with this, or certain monsters with certain abilities sort of tilt the view.
Yeah, I think a big problem in developing that kind of thing is that you need to test it on brand new players who are going to do all that random crazy stuff that they do and completely not understand the rules, so that you can see whether it's going to work. And of course it's really hard to get people to playtest a brand new system when they've never RP'd before.
Yeah, and at the risk of seeming like that old man shouts at cloud meme that's so popular, or like shouts get off my lawn or whatever, I think part of the issue is that in sort of more modern versions of the game, the idea is, the sort of default conception is that you'll create your character and then you're going to be playing that character for a long period of time as part of some heroic saga of that character's story. Whereas I think in the older versions of D&D, which I prefer, so I'm not unbiased, I'm happy to say that, in the older versions, that's not the assumption. The assumption is that your character's going to get taken out by a goblin arrow or a pit trap in a dungeon or something. So I think in that scenario, if you're sort of expecting an ignominious death in a dungeon, having balanced, in inverted commas, encounters and such and using all the challenge ratings or whatever isn't really so important, because it's a different style of game. And I'm not saying if either one of them's bad. I know I prefer the former, the sort of the dim and dingy sort of 4 hit points per level, delving into a dungeon, death from a kobold's arrow sort of style. But if you, and the sort of 5th edition sort of super heroic stuff isn't my vibe, but if you like that, go for it.
Again, I think this is part of that story to game balance, where some people want an epic story that has a few random elements to it, and some people want a game and then they'll make a story out of the results of the dice rolls.
Yeah, and I think partly I think you're absolutely right, Liv. I think partly as well it comes, when we're talking in the Destiny episode, where again, as we were saying there, from my view, is the story is just whatever happens during the game. So it's if my character survives from levels 1 to 20 or whatever, yeah, that's his story. However, if that character dies at level 2 because some necromancer kills him or whatever, that's also the story. And then your new character becomes part of the overall story that goes forward. And I think with that sort of mindset, having these challenge ratings and trying to create balanced encounters isn't so much of an important thing. Whereas if the default assumption is that you're going to stick with the same characters, it becomes more important.
Even in a very story-led game, there's a certain level of you've got to be able to put a challenge in front of the player characters, because otherwise everything's too easy. Yeah,
you're absolutely right, love. And as I've said before, and I love saying no end of times, is the only way you lose in an RPG is if nothing happens. If you go to do something, you do something wrong, or it goes bad, something still happened, the game's moved forward. If you do something and it goes well, the game's moved forward.
Now, I've not looked closely at D&D itself probably since the D20 system came out.
For shame.
But I vaguely remember that in the D20 system, or a version of it, as well as monster encounter challenge ratings, they tried to look at trap encounter challenge ratings and things like terrain encounters.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think they sort of leaned into that a big way in the edition that dare not speak its name. But even in like version 3, 3.5 and 5th edition, you've got like your difficulty class numbers, which are effectively what the challenge rating of whatever task you're doing. And they've sort of codified that a little bit more, where you'll have a little table and it says like, oh, difficulty class 10, so you roll a d20, add whatever modifiers, get 10 or above, that's an average roll or whatever. But there's a similar thing in like Wolfrup, where it's like, oh, here's a little table of modifiers, you want to make it a hard encounter, you put this modifier on it, you want to make it easy, you give this bonus to it. So I think most systems have a way of sort of tweaking the difficulty of something, and obviously the GM sets the difficulty of it entirely, really. So if you want your pit trap or whatever to be ludicrously easy to get over, you can do that. If you want it to be hard to get over or nearly impossible, you can do that as well by just tweaking those numbers very easily. But as we've said in a number of previous episodes, I think you need to telegraph whether it's going to be easy or hard, and it needs to be appropriate for the setting. So if you're doing like a level 1 adventure and it's like, oh, we're just going into some scrubby caves that are populated by goblins, then suddenly there's like an ultimate death trap in it. Unless there's a very sort of telegraphed reason for it, like which you could do. You could be like, oh, these are a special kind of goblins that are renowned for making elaborate death traps. But unless you've done some of that, it's going to seem really weird to have such a like absolutely like horrifying death trap in like a goblin warren. Whereas if you're exploring the ancient pyramid tomb of some mummy lord and there's death traps and falling boulders everywhere, you'll expect that because it's this ancient tomb and it's got that whole Indiana Jones vibe to it. So I think, again, as we've said before, if you want to, depending on where you want to pitch your challenges, you can pitch them as easy as hard as you want, but you do need to have a challenge. Otherwise, if there's no obstacles to anyone, what's the point of the game?
Well, this is where in my games a lot of the time there's not that many combat challenges. In fact, I like to give my players all the toys that they can murder things with, and then I like to give them the challenge of an ethical dilemma where they probably shouldn't be using those toys.
Yeah, I mean, I love an ethical dilemma myself, and I try and put things like that into games, or whether it's like a political dilemma, whatever. But I always keep in mind that like there's every chance like the player character just whoop their swords out and try and fight their way through it. Which, since it's a game based on choice, that is as valid a choice as any other. It may not be the optimal one, but I ran that one Star Trek scenario for Games on Demand probably about 50 times, and they only chose violence once out of all those player groups. Yeah, and I think partly that depends on like the makeup of your group, what the system is. I think if you're playing a system and well, whatever combat we're getting, it's going to be reasonably balanced, we can probably handle it, you're more likely to like resort to violence. Whereas if you're like every combat, you're like, oh shit, we could be getting killed here. You might be looking around at other options, shall we say, first. But as we said, it's a game about choices. There'll be some that are better and some that are worse in certain situations. But whichever one the player characters choose to go with, I think personally as a GM, you have to run with that. And maybe to refer back to the title, maybe that's part of the challenge of being a GM, is sort of like loosening the reins a little bit. And as we talked about previously with like players surprising you, maybe you have to loosen the reins a bit and just sort of go with the flow a little bit more rather than trying to hold on to it too tightly. Perhaps that's something we should challenge ourselves to do as GMs. So that's it from me and Hannah for this RPGaDay 2025 episode.
Bye!
Hopefully you'll join us in the next one. And until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and whenever you're playing, have fun.